Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, crisis strategist, licensed attorney, and host of The Crisis Files. In each case file, we explore a real-world crisis or controversy. My Crisis Squad and I seek solutions. Today, Crisis Squad member Dr. Abdul Omari is here. His work empowers leaders at the intersection of excellence and inclusivity. He's just the person to dive into the case file I call State of Inclusion. Abdul, the headlines say it all. Whether it was a major university missing the boat on cultural clashes or brand name corporations firing their chief diversity officers, the state of inclusion is in a state of flux. Where should it be heading?
Might not be a surprise to anyone, but I believe that we should be moving into it more and leaning into it more. We're certainly at a place of a lot of questions around the legal dynamics and what that means for institutions, whether it's public institutions, private institutions, et cetera. And at the same time, I think we have been, at least ideologically, a nation that when there's been pushback around this notion of welcoming folks and being inclusive from, at a minimum, an ideological standpoint, but oftentimes in practical ways, we have been ones to say, no, we are going to move into this even more so because that's what we believe to be right. And that's why, even from a standpoint of immigration, why there's so many folks who actually want to come here, because that's what we've said and that's what we've stood on in a lot of ways. And quite frankly, it's going to be a time where we're going to see who is standing by that, what institutions are standing by it, largely from an industry standpoint, but also from individual institutions and individuals, politically, states, municipalities are all going to be tested.
The melting pot imagery of the United States has really stuck for a long time. We've seen some cracks in that pot, definitely over the last decade. And there's that legal side, as you point out, the immigration issues, yet people want to come to the United States. They go through death-defying, often, processes to get here, not even knowing that they can get in and survive and stay and all of those things. I mean, I just think of it from my life now. I'm a naturalized U.S. citizen. I was an infant. I didn't have to do anything death-defying to get here. But I cannot even imagine people risking their lives to come in. So when you really look at it from that point of view, inclusion really does matter. And how we do inclusion matters. You are a practitioner of teaching people to be more inclusive, to be more equitable. What does it mean to you personally that this zone has had so many hits in about the last year or two?
It is very challenging in a number of ways. It makes one question if they're in the right field, if they're doing it the right ways, if they should transition into a different field and what that means. You think about language and the ways that you talk about things, right? I've always said that I do work in leadership development, and I believe that doing that in the best way has these lenses of inclusivity and diversity and equity. I took a group of college students to a conference recently at Iowa State, and it typically brings Big 12 schools. So there's folk from Texas, Missouri, Kansas, of course, Iowa and Colorado. And the advisors, we have our own sessions. And so we are in rooms and we're venting and we're talking about what's happening in your states and what's happening in your states. And like many of the headlines have read, one woman was commenting on the letter that she got from their board chair and the president of their institution and said the name of your office has changed, your title has changed, the way that you will do your work is now changing. I mean, that is actually one of the better outcomes versus your entire unit is now gone and you no longer have a job, right? I was reflecting on that. No matter where you fall in line with the policies and the laws that are being passed, when we think about it from a humanity standpoint to say these are their lives, this is their life's work, what they are passionate about and what they believe is the right thing, and to have that upended in a matter of under a year, and in some cases not knowing that you're going to get that letter, hopefully there's a level of empathy that people can have no matter where you stand on the spectrum of what you believe, that people's lives are being upended. And from a student standpoint, particularly talking about higher education, what I'm starting to notice, some students are starting to become significantly more aware of what's happening around in the political realm. And I'm talking big politics, right? Not like the local municipality or what's happening on their campuses, but broadly speaking across the country. And it seems as though some, not all, but some students are starting to say, we got to do some more work individually and really think about how we are impacting what's happening as far as even at the Supreme Court, recognizing that, yes, I vote and it impacts the Supreme Court, or it impacts the legislation that is impacting me or having an effect on me or my siblings or what have you. It's certainly rocking some folks in a way that is getting them to taking more of a personal approach to it.
I love hearing you talk about young people and voting. I really do hope more and more people of all ages realize how important it is to vote.
That's right.
And even though we are each of us one person, it is one person, one vote. But when many of those one people come together, we have a lot of action. I mean, that is how this country has been built, right? When we say the word cultural intelligence, which is a term I've seen in a lot of places, when you just read the term, you think, oh yeah, that's a good thing. But what does it mean, and how would you grade people's ability to be culturally intelligent?
There's two ways to think about this. The term cultural intelligence has been used fairly widely, let's say in the last 5 to 8 years. And it can be as simple as, are you culturally intelligent, right? Which, what does that mean? When I talk about it, and in my sessions, and even the research that I did for my PhD work, and my advisor, who's a psychologist by training, used this framework before me, it is actually a framework that comes out of IQ and general intelligence, which of course then we had emotional intelligence. And cultural intelligence is a fully developed academic framework that has the acronym CQ. And you'll notice the trend here. And so what it's really talking about and thinking about are 4 facets of cultural intelligence, which focus on our motivation to acquire cultural intelligence, our actions when we have cultural intelligence, our cognitive cultural intelligence, and then our metacognitive cultural intelligence. So if you're familiar with IQ and EQ, right, some of these things you'll recognize. And so it's actually a 4-faceted approach to this framework of cultural intelligence that is getting folks to think about, what cultural intelligence do I have? You, Roshini, have a level of cultural intelligence based on your experience, who you are, where you were raised, your skin tone, your religion, etc. The metacognitive piece is about big picture. How do I acquire more cultural intelligence? What strategies can I use to acquire more cultural intelligence? Motivational, what motivates me to do it? And for everybody, there's something different. And then what do I do with it? So now is the action piece. How do I adjust my behavior in intercultural situations without losing myself in a way that will foster better experiences and interactions in those intercultural experiences and situations?
In general, this is definitely a term that isn't out there in mainstream. Is it growing? I mean, IQ is definitely out there.
I think it is growing. There's very few people that I encounter that they say, I know that framework that you're talking about. They'll say, I've taken in the term cultural intelligence, but again, right, for a while it was culturally competent. And sometimes these two things get used interchangeably. But as far as the actual framework that I just laid out, it's far and few in between that are familiar with it. And one of the things that I love about it is, my PhD advisor is a psychologist, and he used the cultural intelligence framework to think about how he does therapy. I did it from a mentoring standpoint and how you engage in a mentoring relationship. One of the things that I love about this framework is you can contextualize it in all kinds of different ways, whatever work setting you're in or personal setting or what have you, in ways that will hopefully drive more inclusive, closer relationships built on understanding, flexibility, curiosity.
I love the framework because it's both a very good tool for self-assessment, while at the same time it's a call to action, to actually use your cultural intelligence, grow it for the better, grow it for bigger spaces, bigger places. In past case files, Abdul, since the crisis files came into existence, you've been teaching us a lot in the inclusion space and terminology we've gotten into. And we hear that term microaggressions. Yeah. Do you think as a nation, the United States has gotten better when it comes to microaggression?
There is a larger awareness of the term, for sure. It comes down to the folks who are interested and committed to being more inclusive, that are doing the self-assessment and wanting to learn more and think about how their words and terminology might impact someone else. I also think that there are a number of people who have leaned in the opposite direction, that have said, these things are not that big of a deal, and I won't let you police my language It's a challenging conversation to have with folks. I actually just had one last week with someone that was in one of my larger training sessions, and we had a bit of a back and forth to the point where I said, well, let's talk about it afterwards. This person's viewpoint was, I view a term as endearing and mean no harm by it, and someone else views it as demeaning. Or the person had said to a younger person in his workplace, "Good morning, young lady." And the person did not take a liking to that. Their feeling was, I'm from the South, this is something that we view as, endearing and loving and what have you. What was fascinating to me, even though that there was no ill intent and it was viewed as a term of endearment, was the unwillingness to say, I recognize that this is harmful to you, and therefore I will unpack, number one, why, or attempt to unpack why, and then two, I would be willing to change my language so that it is not harmful to you. Instead, what happened was, you can't tell me what I can and can't say, and you're not going to police the things that I say. I didn't mean it to be any harm. The rest is on you. So there's definitely two camps that I think are formulating.
When I hear this example, I think about when I'm talking with clients and teaching them about just strategic messaging and messaging in general. You have to think about who your audience is. So the performance is the delivery, whether it's written or spoken, verbal, nonverbal, but mainly it's the delivery. And we can't make the performance about ourselves. So when that person continued to say, this is how I mean it, well, your audience who you said it to doesn't take it that way. And in order to resonate or be influential with your audience, we need to communicate in a way, we want to be authentic to ourselves, but in a way that they are going to hear us, feel us, receive us, perceive us. I'm not ever asking people to change who they are, but they have to change the mechanics to land the message. So that's why I like thinking of it in the terms of, if you've got a tough nut like that to crack sometimes, audience analysis. What is it that you want? Do you want to just continue being you to the detriment or who cares about everybody else? Or do you want your audience to actually start trusting you, receive you, believe you, be persuaded by you? And that's really a qualitative assessment, first and foremost. So these worlds do marry. I was just curious, because you're in this work all the time, day in and day out, if we've made some progress as a nation.
Yeah. There is also a starting point when the conversations begin to happen around inclusivity and diversity and inclusion, where some people will kind of right away, like, hold on, I'm on the defensive. What's fascinating is I'm also developing some new content about executive presence right now. And Harvard Business Review did a kind of timestamp 2 studies in 2012 and 2022 around executive presence and what it means. And one of the things that came about was the overall rules, I put those in air quotes, of executive presence stayed the same: gravitas, communication, and appearance over a 10-year period. But the traits that come with it and the tactics to accomplish those traits have shifted. One of the things that they talk about is, rather than in communication being forceful, it's about listening to learn in a way to communicate, right? It's about communicating in different formats and venues, whether that's online and in person. Before, it was your fit. You're slim, you wear a suit. Now it's you dress for your audience. You dress for the new normal. It made me wonder if I had approached that situation in less of like, we're talking about DEI and we're actually talking about executive presence, how it would have been received.
Right. So I'm really glad you said that, because I think the language itself is what hurts this subject matter. I've never been a fan of the term diversity, and I was studying your website recently, and I'm glad that you really lead with inclusion. I love your intersection of excellence and inclusivity. I think that's just brilliant, because if we can think about the world in terms of equity and inclusion, or inclusion as the table stakes, everybody matters, everyone's voice can be heard. Now we're equal playing field. Now then we get to merit. And at a certain level of merit, there should be equity in pay, equity in opportunity. And so I really wish the term diversity would just go away from the scene. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there screaming as they're listening to this, but I think that is a divider word, because the lawyer in me immediately goes to checklist and quotas.
That has been one of the challenges with progress, is there can be checklists and quotas. In a lot of ways, the terms are charged in that folks oftentimes view all of this as a zero-sum game. And if someone else is coming, that means I'm losing. When in reality, there's so much to go around. The challenges with diversity are everybody is being invited to the dance. Inclusivity is more about, are we asking people to actually dance with us? And then equity is really about, are we changing the DJ so that everybody has a genre? Right? And so there are layers and steps to it, right? And quite frankly, if you think about it, diversity is actually not that hard. We could go get a bunch of people with diverse backgrounds from all the different, dimensions of diversity that we have and throw them in a room together, and it doesn't mean that they're going to accomplish anything. It is that almost first step of the conversation by all means. And the other thing that I'll say is people are starting to ask this question of, my work is my work. I care about these things, diversity, equity, inclusion, equality, justice, et cetera. And they're asking this question of, do I care more about what they're called, or do I care about the work that I'm doing? I think it's a really important question for folks to be thinking about, what that means to them within their institutions and their individual work. It's an important one, and I also think it's a challenging one. There's going to be a range of how people fall on that line of, does it matter what it's called, or does the actual work matter the most?
Right, and most businesses, organizations are going to come down on it's the work, connected to profit, connected to viability. And I really feel as a strategist, if we can get past this state that we're in right now, this state of flux, and see that it's all about progress, and in some cases, many cases, that means profitability, but just viable options that will succeed and move us forward, then maybe we can stop having these back and forth discussions about whether we should have inclusive environments, whether diversity matters. Of course it does. I mean, think about plants. You need diverse plants for the garden to work. Otherwise, they all die or they all are too big, whatever it is. So very, very, very interesting, not necessarily easy items to cover. My last question for you is this idea of inclusive spaces. How can each of us, I like to leave people with just an easy solution to what can sometimes be a complex topic, but how do we just in our day-to-day be more inclusive with our spaces, with how we just go about doing this?
So I usually try to break this down into 3 elements. One is when we're interacting with other humans, right? So things that we might say, things that we can do. There's always a level of self-reflection in all of this. One way is to be thinking about how we can humanize ourselves more. In the workplace, traditionally, right, you come to work and that's work, and then your home life is something different. Unless you share similarities with someone, and then you'll talk about those similarities. And what I like to tell people is to be thinking about what ways, when you show up in whatever spaces those are, whether it's work or your civic life or what have you, you can humanize yourself more. So maybe you're talking about your dog, and then the next one you're talking about some of your hobbies. Now maybe you'll talk about the kids. Now maybe you'll talk about your partner, whatever. And that's a spectrum, right? Like I'm usually all in, right? Yes. Whether I'm in front of an audience of 1,000 people but my sister is like, dude, stop telling our families our business, right? And so very different in that instance. So humanizing ourselves is one way to think about it when we're interacting with other humans. When you're in work situations in particular, I always think about content development and usage. So are we using images that are representative of a lot of different people? Are we creating exercises that don't always make people get up and move around? Because what if somebody can't get up and move around? And so being conscious about those things. And then the last one that I think about is more, what can you do when you are driving and you're listening to the podcast? Or what books can you read? Or what documentaries, et cetera? And so really stretching ourselves to think about the ways in which we can learn or from sources that we may not traditionally go to. And then that, again, will encompass all of this in the ways that we can increase creating and, of course, fostering inclusive spaces.
Exactly. Well, of course, being a regular listener of the Crisis Files gets you started really nicely
Absolutely.
With that advice. Thanks so much, Dr. Abdul Omari, for your always keen insights. Find more of his takes at abdulomari.com. Today's Crisis Brief is brought to you by Spoke 612 Productions. Number 1, we talked about CQ. Do yourself a favor and dive into the 4 pillars of cultural intelligence. Number 2, what matters more to you, the labels or the work? Number 3, look for ways to humanize yourself and others. Spoke 612 Productions takes your ideas and brings them to life. Linda, Sarah, and Matt are committed to excellence and inclusivity. As a WeBanks production company, Spoke 612 inspires awareness and delivers impact through storytelling. When you put your project in their hands, Spoke 612 draws on their own talents and experience to ensure they tell the best possible version of your story. Visit their portfolio at spoke612.com. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Check out our website, thecrisisfiles.com, to catch up on all case files in one easy spot. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at The Crisis Files. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.